Welcome to the Tiny House Ideas podcast, the show where we talk about how to live a more fulfilling life with less. My name's Harry Alvarez Garman, and I've got tons of exciting guests lined up for you, including authors, entrepreneurs, and tiny house owners. If you love minimalism, sustainable living, personal development, and everything in between, then you're in the right place. On the show, we'll be talking about how you can do more of what you love, how to turn your passion into a career, and how to live more sustainably.
So I'm Michael. I'm a tiny house dweller and builder. I'm an actor. I'm a podcast producer and host, and living life as an artist.
Fantastic. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast, Michael. Thank you very much for coming on. And it'll be exciting to sort of discuss, obviously, your tiny house, your building process. We can discuss, obviously, the environmental factors as well, and just sort of learn more about life in a tiny house.
Yeah, I'm excited for it.
Fantastic. Perfect. So I guess the best place to start is where it all started, really. What was the sort of the main inspiration for you wanting to sort of pursue this alternative lifestyle?
Yeah, so I'm in my mid 30s now, and I was about 28 years old. Yeah. And I had just ended a 8-year relationship with my college girlfriend. So I was a bit of a turning point because I was now single, and It was always we, and then suddenly it was just me. And I really had to question, what does my life look like now, and what do I want to pursue, and what are my goals? And so after thinking about it for a time, a few things started to come up, and some of those things were, going back to school. Did I want to learn more and grow and in that way? Traveling, maybe did I want to travel more because we were in one location and I didn't know exactly where I wanted to end up, and so traveling was very attractive to me. Yeah. And also the other idea of just settling down and buying a house, that just didn't love that idea. So it's like, I'm in my, pushing 30. I want to buy a house. I don't want to keep renting. And so, yeah, travel, going back to school, house. And then I found out about tiny living. And for me, it kind of brought all those things together because I decided I wanted to build my own tiny house. And in that, I could be learning and growing and have a project that would keep me very busy. And it was on wheels. So I could, if I needed to, move around. I wasn't tied to one place. And then exactly. in the end, I also had a house because, a lot of those things were experiences and those are valuable in and of themselves. But in the end, I wanted to have something that if I could come back to. So that's how tiny living kind of started for me.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's just the flexibility of the tiny lifestyle that is just sort of so difficult to reach with sort of the alternative housing and going down the almost sort of the beaten path and the sort of following the standard American dream. It doesn't work for everyone. It's great to see that there's that alternative option. And like you said, you were at a turning point and you were able to sort of find the freedom, the ability to move if that works in terms of education, in terms of jobs or whatever, and also not having to be tied down to a mortgage to sort of 25, 30 years of payments when you can build, learn, experience, I'd imagine meet people, take on so many experiences, so many new ideas. And then at the end of it, you've had a great experience, you've got a house and you're able to sort of live life on your terms.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Fantastic. So how was the build process? Did you have any experience building prior to this, or was it sort of jumping at the deep end, or how did that go?
Yeah, no, I was a pretty handy person growing up. My dad taught me to weld. He was a journeyman welder and a mechanic. And so I was always tinkering in the garage. I went to art school, but after I finished art school, I was a framer for a time to pay off my student loans. So I learned how to frame houses for about a year. And so going into it, I had a fair bit of experience building, but I definitely hadn't done any sort of electrical or plumbing or some of the other parts of the build. One unique thing about my house is that we ended up building our own trailers because my dad was a welder and because he taught me to weld. Yeah, so it was like, might as well just build the whole thing. So part of it was the cost saving because as I'm sure you know, like a good tiny house trailer, if you're going to do it right, it can cost you $10,000, right? And that's fine, and you should definitely be doing that. You shouldn't just put it on any old trailer. But because we had those skills, especially my dad, it was like, let's do this. And I probably saved maybe $4,000 on just doing it myself. Yeah. And he was checking my welds and made sure everything was okay, but definitely took that on. And one nice thing about that was that I put the bathroom on the tongue side of the trailer, and I actually put it 2 feet above the main deck and built the bathroom floor out of metal as well.
Fantastic.
And what that allowed was that I knew that underneath was going to be kind of a maintenance room where I was going to put things, my furnace, my batteries, my water heater, but I didn't quite know the order or how that was going to look. And so having it made out of metal left that space entirely open. So I could kind of have an open floor plan that way. So that really worked out well. So the trailer probably took a few weeks. I didn't do the wiring right away. I put that into the walls of the house. And then after that, it was a lot longer. It was 4 years in total. It was three
Wow.
part-time and then 1 year in 2020 full-time building. So it was quite a lot of work.
Well, it definitely sounds like it was a really good process, and to have those sort of skills already must have been a huge help. And obviously those savings that you mentioned along the way as well, it all really, really adds up and makes it a much more affordable way of doing things. I wanted to ask, with obviously you went into this with some building experience, for people that are looking to do or embark on their own self-builds, would you sort of have any advice if they're sort of coming into it with no experience, or would you recommend sort of doing a few courses, or for looking for help, or would you say it's manageable for someone to do with little to no experience?
No, I would definitely say if you have no experience building, that this would be a very large undertaking. I probably wouldn't recommend building from scratch. Yeah, definitely you could work with a builder. That's definitely an option depending on your budget. And there are lots of workshops as well if you do want to learn those skills. Because for me, that was part of it, was that I wanted to learn and grow and have that challenge, where some people maybe just want to live in the house and they just want to get there as fast as possible.
Exactly.
For me, it was the process as well. So if you're looking for that, I would say, yes, definitely do it. Like all these things that I've done, it's not rocket science. Like if you do enough reading, if you watch enough videos, if you talk to enough people, if you do enough research and practice, that plumbing and somewhat electrical. I did have help with the electrical, but some of these things are very simple as long as you know what you're doing ahead of time. So I would say that if people are wanting to build their own, then definitely go for it. But if they're not comfortable with that, there are a lot of options. Even some tiny houses you can buy that have been pre-made. You'll definitely want to look into it a bit, do your research, but that's absolutely an option if your goal is to just get into a tiny house.
Yeah, no, for sure. And there are so many options. There's even those sort of the houses that come from builders as shells that you can sort of do the interior, and all of the plumbing's been sort of signed off by professionals. The electrician's done all of that work prior to that, and you can sort of do the aesthetic. So there are sort of lots of options for people that are listening that are looking at sort of embarking on a tiny house of their own. And obviously you mentioned as well, sort of working with a builder if that fits your budget and your sort of time frame, because obviously, like you said, it was about the process and more about the sort of experiences you picked up along the way, rather than just that sort of end goal as soon as possible. So in terms of the process, you said you were part-time for 3 years. Was that whilst you were working, or you said you went back to school, or?
No, I was working at post-secondary at the time, and so I had a full-time job, and so that was just evenings and weekends picking away at
weekends.
So that's another thing, is that how much time it does take, if depending on, again, what level you're at and your skill level and how much of the build you take on. Because if you do get a shell, then there's going to be a lot less building required. That's for sure. But if you are doing everything from scratch, it's going to take a lot more time. So that's something I was actually surprised about. I thought, like a year, I could probably pick it away at it in a year, and I was nowhere near being done in a year. And then it was 2 years and 3 years. I'm still not done. And eventually it was part of my transition. I left my post-secondary position and finished the bill. It took a year to finish the bill, but it's, that's something that you definitely have to consider when you're wanting to build, is how much time everything does take. And if you don't have the time, then how are you going to accomplish that in another way, or just to accept it and put the time in?
So you mentioned that you'd left the post-secondary position, and then you sort of had this transition. And I also, sort of having spoken to you via email just before this podcast, you're now sort of pursuing your own sort of creative endeavors and sort of being able to do your own thing. And that sort of transition from working for someone to working for yourself, how have you found that?
Yeah, that was definitely a big transition for sure. So I went to art school. I studied acting, and in order to, again, pay off my loans, I went into a job in post-secondary, and it was kind of supposed to be for a year while my then partner was going to school. And then it became 2 and 3 and then 6 years. And I found that, I wasn't doing as much performing. I still was, but not as much as I wanted to. And it was becoming this thing that was holding me back. It was like, I like what I'm doing well enough. It's okay. Like I like the people I work with. And in some ways that made it more difficult to leave, because it's one thing if I was working at a job I hated and slaving away and feeling awful, but it's like, on paper, I've got benefits, I've got a full-time salary, like I'm doing pretty well. And absolutely couldn't have built a tiny house on an actor's salary for sure. So that definitely was part of it. But looking at the long term, I thought life is too short to just work a job that's okay just to pay the bills, right? So
exactly.
Part of that transition was okay, this is what I want to do. I want to finish the house. I want to do more acting, do more creative endeavors, and I want to make that my full-time thing. And so in 2020, I took that leap and I left that position and was actually really interesting because a lot of people leave a job for another job. It's a very common thing that they do. And I was leaving for nothing. I just walked away because I had
taking the leap.
Yeah. And there's definitely it was a longer transition and earlier. So that would have been in the spring of 2020. Later in 2019, I ended up actually seeing a psychologist, a counselor, because I was kind of going through a situational depression a little bit.
Right.
I was unhappy. And we, in talking with him, it was like, part of that is because you identify so much with the work that you're doing, what you're doing now isn't fulfilling in the long term for you, and that's not the right fit for you. And so that really, really helped giving me the courage and the confidence to say, okay, I'm going to do something else. And I don't know what that is. And that was a really big leap because it's really easy to say, oh, I've got this new job and I'm moving. Bye, everyone. It's a lot harder to say, okay, bye, everyone. I'm going to go finish my house and then see what happens. And
sure.
Yeah, it was definitely a bigger risk, you would say. But in the end, I was able to make that change, partly for my partner, who's very supportive, but also because I realized that like everything in life is a risk. There are no guarantees, right?
Yeah.
And so I could, with back to my building example, if I went back to school and I studied something, but maybe I didn't get a job in that, or I moved somewhere and that didn't work out, or I got a house and then I had to move and sell the house. Like there were no guarantees in life, right? So I thought, why not prioritize what I want to do and give it a shot and take a risk. And I've been actually so surprised in how many opportunities I've been afforded because I took that leap. And now I have the time to invest in projects that are meaningful to me.
That is great to hear that you're now able to sort of spend the time on things that you do find more meaningful and more fulfilling. And it's sort of easier to sort of switch off and to be able to sort of focus on your own thing rather than taking all of this sort of home from work and things. So it's definitely congratulations as well for making that bold move and for being able to do that. And it sounds like it's obviously working out well, and you seem to be, obviously enjoying the things you're doing. So you say you do acting, you're into some filmmaking, and of course you've got the podcast as well.
Yeah. So I'm kind of doing all those things at varying levels. My schedule definitely ranges from day to day. I could be, applying to casting calls. I might be on a set for a day. Sometimes I'm on a set for a few weeks. Maybe in rehearsals for a theater production, making short films. Like a lot of that is kind of some small film festivals. So I might be collaborating with people, maybe writing a script or making a short film. And then of course the podcast is the biggest thing right now because that's a lot more work as far as getting guests and producing it and things like that. So, but it's all very rewarding for sure.
Yes. Yeah, no, definitely. And that is the main thing, sort of having it as being something that is rewarding. And it sounds like as well, you're sort of day to day that there's not a standard day. It varies and you're able to do different things that you enjoy and make up the week that way.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. Yeah. And part of living where we do is that we live on a farm. In Western Canada in Alberta. And so I actually do some odd jobs that kind of pay for the spot. So that's kind of sometimes part of my day. Right now it's winter and things are quite slow, but in the summer it's a little busier. So I kind of work around that as well and mow the lawn or check on buildings or whatever little odd job. So that's part of my day as well.
Fair enough. Brilliant. So is this sort of agreement with a landlord that sort of owns this land that you're sort of renting in return for some sort of help on the land?
Yeah. So it's a family farm. They've been farming for some 6 years. They're actually in their 80s, which is amazing. And they farm crops. And it was actually kind of a fun story. So before I'd finished the build, like I didn't want to necessarily, if I could, pay money for a spot. Like I wanted to develop community and looking at that, living that artist lifestyle. Part of the reason I'm able to do that is because my cost of living is so low. So it's like, how do I get my cost of living as low as possible? How can I be as frugal as possible? And in helping on someone's property, I'm also, again, developing that community and relationship more than just transactionally giving money. And my dad is a musician and he's in his mid 60s and all of his kind of groupies are in that 60s, 70s, 80s. And one day at a driveway concert outside, he said, who still gets the newspaper, right? And everyone's hands went up about, oh, that's interesting. And so I actually put an ad in the local newspaper, like it's 1950 or something. I said, I've got this trailer and I'm going to want to park it on your place and I will do some odd jobs. And I was actually overwhelmed by how many responses I got.
Because, amazing.
Yeah, because it made sense, I guess, because I thought it was like, well, can I please maybe park here if that's okay? But for the owners, like farms are quite large. They got lots of space. We're off grid, so we're not taking up a lot of resources. And so for them, it seemed like a win-win. So we got quite a few responses, and one family responded, and we met them, and we just loved the energy and how charismatic they were. And like I said, they're in their 80s and they're still farming. Like that's amazing for longevity and what you can do when you love something so much, right? And I really wanted that. So we decided, we're going to move here, and we moved in the spring, and we've been loving it ever since.
Oh, fantastic! That is brilliant that you had so many responses from that I guess demographic of people, and you're able to sort of find a situation that really works for you. And like we said, that's something that sort of wouldn't have happened if you hadn't have taken the plunge a sort of year or so before.
Yeah, and it's really that, like you talked about before, like that mindset of, if I thought going into it that no one's going to reply, I'm not going to find a place, this isn't going to work out, I'm already setting myself up for failure. But by first of all taking that leap of leaving that full-time job when it was right, when I had the savings and I was ready to move on, that those next leaps just don't seem nearly as big, right? Because I go, I'm building a house, I'm doing all these crazy things. Let's put an ad out and see what happens, and force people to respond, because people are generally good and they generally want to help. And the way we're living is not in a sketchy way. We're not trying to it's trying to help. It's trying to give back and build community. So it's definitely an attractive thing, and I can see why people responded. So taking that leap, great.
Brilliant. And you mentioned briefly as well, it was sort of once you'd sort of taken this big step, everything else sort of seemed so much easier going forwards. And sort of touching back on sort of previous episodes, and in terms of sort of mindset, personal development, things like that, the more you sort of put yourself in situations that are sort of difficult outside of your comfort zone, then it just sort of almost the world's your oyster. It makes every other decision easier. If you sort of do one difficult thing every day and sort of push yourself, then everything else that sort of comes your way will be taken in your stride, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And because it wasn't that one day I decided I'm going to build a house and leave my job and be an artist and do it. It was a very slow process. And, and one thing I would add to that part of the conversation is it's part of the mindset, but I think it's also another thing that maybe people don't talk about as much is surrounding yourself with like-minded people.
Yes,
and that, like huge. I mentioned, my partner, Sarah, she came from Spain. She finished her PhD. She wanted to work in Canada, work in the mountains. And so she moved here, like myself, taking a big risk, not really knowing if there was any guarantees, and it worked out very well. And so she was a huge support for me. And also actually in 2016, before I started the build, I had decided I wanted to do it. I went down to Colorado for the National Tiny House Jamboree, and I met so many people there. It was a convention of tiny houses. So there's about 40 tiny houses on display, and there's workshops and speakers and other networking opportunities. And meeting those people inspired me. And while I was on that trip, I did couch surfing. So I stayed with locals as I was traveling along through couchsurfing.com. And again, meeting those people was like, look at all the amazing people what they're doing. And so when I got back, I kept hosting people right before the pandemic for 3 years. I kept hosting people, probably 50 people from around the world. Wow. And every person that I met really helped me take that leap when I needed to, right? I've met people who were hitchhiking. I met one fellow who hitchhiked from Poland in Europe all the way across to Las Vegas, Nevada. He hitchhiked across Europe, boat hiked across the Atlantic, and then through the States, because he loved hip hop and Snoop Dogg, and he wanted to meet Snoop Dogg. So it was hashtag Hitch to Snoop. And then he did it. He made it, and he met Snoop Dogg, and it was an amazing thing. Yeah, but for him, it was like, I'm going to leave everything I have, and I'm going to go on this trip, and that's what I want to do. And I met people who were biking across the country, who were living in vans for years, traveling across North America. And the more that I met these people, the more inspired I felt, and the easier my transition was. Because I think a lot of people who might be, looking at Instagram posts and YouTube videos and have a dream of living tiny or living an alternative lifestyle. Yeah. But part of the reason they're maybe not going to take that leap is because they're surrounded by other people who say that's stupid, that's a bad idea, you should really be more practical. And it's not that you have to leave all your friends and live in the woods, but if you can, try to get other perspectives and get people who have done it before or who have gone through a similar transition, who say it's not that crazy, you should do it, and you should prioritize what you want to do, or you will be very unhappy in the years to come. So surrounding yourself with a support network is integral to making any sort of big leap and big transition.
I completely agree. And like you said, it's about the sort of the being able to surround yourself with like-minded individuals and find the community. And I mean, we are sort of so lucky to have such a fantastic community around the sort of the tiny house, the alternative living, sort of van life, bus life. There's so many people that sort of share the values that we do, and that share the sort of wanting to sort of live life on your own terms, and to sort of free yourself from all of the things that sort of maybe holding you down or whatever. So it's great that you sort of were able to find the sort of people with similar mindsets who are able to sort of support you, and then you can support them. And it's hopefully things like this as well. Hopefully the podcast will sort of hope to encourage people that are sort of looking to move tiny, to build tiny in the future, sort of give them a platform and somewhere to listen. The same for yours as well, obviously, to sort of advise people and to help them in taking those steps, and show them that there are people here, and it's a community that welcomes everyone with open arms. And there's so many sort of festivals, like you said, you went to the Jamboree as well. There's sort of events all over the US, all over the world, that people can go to and sort of connect with the people that they look to.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful part of the age we live in with the internet and connectivity, is that you can, like you and I are talking from across, the world, basically, right? Like you can, if you can't find your community in your hometown or where you live, look elsewhere to find it. And maybe that's online. And I think that's an amazing resource that people should definitely tap into.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And mentioning your podcast as well, the In Over My Head podcast, you sort of discuss the sort of the phases you've gone through, and sort of troubleshooting the problems and the things with Tiny Life. If you'd like to sort of just go into sort of talking some more about what happens on your podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the podcast is called In Over My Head, and it's actually has an environmental focus, because part of the reason I wanted to downsize, as I think a lot of people do in the tiny house community, is an environmental focus. And so I wanted to lower my environmental footprint. I wanted to, use fewer resources in building the house and heating the house and such. And I did that. But then through that process, I also started to question other things in my life and my priorities. And also, okay, I've now downsized and I'm using fewer resources, but how about when I'm driving somewhere? How about the food I'm eating, the clothes I'm wearing, the things I'm buying? And it built on and on and on. I felt overwhelmed. I felt in over my head. And so I decided to do the podcast and talk to experts and have them kind of dispel myths. And I kind of frame it as all those questions you have about lowering your footprint, you don't know who to ask. Like, how much does flying impact my footprint, or driving, or the food I eat, or again, the things I buy? So I talk to experts, and I focus a season on a specific topic. The first season was on my community because it was funded by Tell a Story Hive, a media company, and it had to be about the community. And so it was about environmentalism in my local community. But now it's branching out to other areas of how can we effectively tackle the climate crisis? And by giving people knowledge into those different areas, I think we're going to empower people. And they're, 20, 30 minutes each. They're very short episodes, but I think they're hopefully give people, inspire them to also take some action.
Definitely nice and easy to digest, and sort of be able to take on those tips and ways in which people can look to lower their footprints and to live in a similar way.
Yeah. And hopefully, like I said, not feel overwhelmed like I did, right? Like that feeling over your head, because it's a very natural feeling and you feel like giving up. And I think that's not the right approach. And I think education and learning is the thing to do. And hopefully people feel empowered by that.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Yeah. So some of the guests that you've had on and some of the discussions you've had. Yeah,
so far, so we're in season 3 now. So season 1, again, about my community. There was like Kathleen Shepard it's called Environment Lethbridge. And we talked about actually like downsizing and the impact that has, and even little things like turning down your thermostat, or if you boil a kettle of tea, like just boiling as much as you need instead of a whole kettle. And so we talked about tiny living and how we can effectively downsize. I talked about solar panels with Bryce Allred, and he talked about installing them and how much it costs and the effectiveness and what the future looks like that way. Season 2 was a focus on transportation. And so I talk planes, trains, and automobiles with people from across the country. So some really big experts from various universities and doing research in these areas, talking about, how much does flying impact our environmental impact? How much does flying impact our environmental impact?
Tongue twister.
Right? Cars. I want to know about electric cars. So we talked about that, and trains, and even active transportation, biking and walking, and things like that. So, season 3 is about the decarbonization of the electricity grid. So that's definitely a topic where I feel a bit overwhelmed, a bit in over my head. But just figuring all those things out. I just go through it in how I would think and the questions I have, because I don't know much about electric cars. I've never been in one. I don't know how they do. We have winter here in Canada. I don't know how that works. So I ask some very simple questions and try to make it accessible for people.
Oh, well, it all sounds great. And was obviously the environmental impact sort of is something that means a lot to you. Was that sort of one of the main reasons that you did look to move into a tiny house?
Yeah, it was the big one. Yeah, probably the biggest two were environmental and then just the financial benefits as well. But yeah, absolutely. The tiny house was a key factor in my environmentalism and how can I effectively reduce my footprint is in housing. So let's live in a smaller house for sure. That definitely
there we go. And that reduce the physical and the obviously the environmental footprint. So obviously off grid was a big sort of a big point for you, and obviously you said you're off grid on the farm that you're living and sort of helping on there. So what sort of off grid features do you have in place that sort of allows you to be self sustaining?
Yeah, so it's a 12-volt system. It runs on solar panels. We've got 570 watts on the roof there, and then it's run by propane as well. Those are the main two off-grid things. And with my solar system, I tried to limit the amount of electronic appliances that I have in the house. So trying to simplify that in order to have less demand on that system. So the furnace runs on the 12 volts. That's probably the biggest draw, especially in the winter. And I've got a solar fridge. It's I think a 20 cubic foot solar fridge that draws a fair bit of power, but everything else is very, very little, like LED lights and minimal appliances. So in doing that, I actually went through like my kitchen, for example, and what things use electricity that I could actually find a replacement for and use an alternative. And so I went through and like we now have a stovetop popcorn popper. We have a stovetop toaster. We have a coffee grinder that's just a hand grinder. And so there's so many appliances that still get that job done, but then they also use less electricity. So you have less demand on your system. So that was kind of a fun process. And that's part of the whole project too, is you're thinking outside the box. And so that really helps a lot. And so we have a propane system right now. We are on propane, so it just helps with the off-gridness, and that runs our heating system. We have hot water for cooking and showers and things like that. And then of course that gas range, but it's small. It's very, very small, 3 small burners, and so it doesn't use very much propane, especially compared to a conventional house. And so we are obviously reducing, even though we're using a non-renewable resource there, we're still using very little of it. And that really helps with the off-gridness too.
Brilliant. And I think things like that, I hadn't even thought about sort of having a multi-purpose to the stove. So rather than obviously the sort of conventional cooking, you can sort of have a toaster there. You can sort of use the popcorn and everything like that. And that's something I'd not thought of personally. So that's for those of you listening as well, is sort of a great point to sort of remember that you don't need sort of separate things to do separate jobs. You can sort of be able to sort of improvise and to find ways. And I can imagine it's a constantly evolving process for you as well, sort of looking at things that you can sort of always improve or looking at things that sort of can be streamlined or made more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially being in such a small space, it's 200 square feet. Any tiny house, like you have to have things that are multi-purpose because you will not have enough space for everything. And especially in the kitchen, I find kitchens are places that people have lots of gadgets, and they have a deep fryer and this thing I haven't used for 3 years and this thing that does one little thing. It's like, maybe I just get a nice cast iron pan and I cook pancakes in that instead of having a pancake machine that you can use electricity. So yeah, absolutely. It was actually a fun part of the journey. And not only are we saving space, but also with those things, like if you have something that's an electronic appliance, it doesn't have to be, you're now using fewer resources, because instead of having wires and copper and plastic and things for that appliance, now I have just a metal toaster that goes on top of the stove, and it's going to probably last a decade or two because it's just metal and it's simple, right? Or that cast iron pan is going to last me the rest of my life, rather than buying some little appliance that might fit a really niche thing, but does it do a lot of things? And is there something that you could get instead that's going to be multi-purpose and last you longer? So even if people aren't living in a tiny house, I definitely encourage them, that kind of buy me once philosophy is part of our lifestyle too, right? Is buy something that's quality, that's going to last. And then in that way, you're going to be saving money in the long run, even though maybe the cost might be a little more upfront, but you're saving money in the long run. And environmentally, you're using fewer resources because you're not replacing that thing every few years. if it's going to last you decades and decades and decades, and you get more use out of it and you get more enjoyment out of it the longer you have it.
I'm just going to give a quick mention to Tiny House Ideas. So Tiny House Ideas is my business, is my company. It's been what I've been working on for the last 5 years in the long term, and especially over lockdown, over the last year or so, I've really put some time, energy and effort into building this business. So Tiny House Ideas obviously started with an Instagram page, and it has grown and developed into the business that it is today. It's the perfect free platform for anyone interested in the tiny house movement, in the tiny house community. First of all of the images that I feature on Instagram, you can find out more information. You can get a full fact file over on the website. As well as that, there's a really cool tool called Find Me a Builder, where for free I will personally pair a few tiny house builders with you based on your requirements, and that will save you going through hours and hours of searching through Google results. Take the stress out of it for you, really. And obviously it's no obligation. I'll send you a few recommendations and it's up to you what you do with them. Another section of the website is the approved builders section. So I've been working with a few tiny house builders that I really stand behind, that I see the value in their work. So there's a profile there to sort of tell you more about them, and so you can contact them directly if you've got any jobs that you're interested in. And finally, on the website there's a section for tiny house vacations. So if you guys are looking to go away and to try the tiny house movement, to try the tiny house living, but don't know if you want to commit to it, if you don't want to live there just yet, then a vacation is a really, really great way to sort of get acclimatized, to learn more about it. And you can do that by clicking on the vacations tab of the Tiny House Ideas website and learning more and searching through some amazing holiday homes. I really, really do stand behind the philosophy of sort of buy better, buy once, rather than sort of, like you said, just sort of replacing these sort of substandard utensils. Just it sort of goes for everything really as well. I mean, obviously it is a sort of higher initial investment, but in the long term, it sort of makes the world of difference. And in terms of being able to sort of really enjoy the things that you're using and sort of get the most out of them, and sort of, like you said, it was nice to sort of be able to use things, and it sort of keeps the process more enjoyable, more engaging, rather than almost sort of, I guess, I don't know if dehumanizing it is the way to say it, but sort of when there's so many things that are doing different things and you sort of press a button and they work away. But it's nice to sort of have that you're making your own toast, you're keeping an eye on it. You need to sort of constantly be sort of taking a look at these things, rather than just sort of pressing a button and forgetting about something. You can really sort of, it's quite a nice process, I can imagine, just to be able to really focus in on those sorts of things, those sort of small things that just make the day a bit better.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a bit of a mindfulness thing as well. And
for sure,
yeah. Having fewer things, like I said, you appreciate them more. And you're right. If I'm making toast, because it doesn't just pop up and stop, I kind of have to watch it. And but you also adapt too, right? Like I've noticed in the tiny living is that you adapt. And as we've talked about mindset, like a lot of it is when I look at even just that small example of, okay, in the kitchen, how many appliances do we have and what can we replace that doesn't use electricity or isn't an appliance? And even that small example, like I saw that as a challenge that I needed to kind of embrace, rather than a hurdle or a headache, or, oh, we have to do this again. So that was all, even that small example, part of that mindset mentality of, this is something that I want to do and I'm excited about it. And that makes it that much easier. And on like, and even another level there, building your own like furniture, like you with your furniture designing. I built all the furniture, the countertop, everything, and that even takes it to another level of like, if someone came in and said we should redecorate, I would say, you go away. I don't like you, because I spent thousands of hours building this thing. I'm not going to replace it just on a whim, because I feel like, changing the look up a bit, like it changes your relationship with your house and your things. When you build, if you can, when you build your own things or fix things that are broken, things like that, because now you appreciate it that much more, because you put so many of your own hours, rather than just paying someone in China to build this thing that you're just going to throw away in a few years, this piece of garbage. If you build it yourself, that just, it takes it to a whole nother level of appreciation.
I completely agree. And I guess without being really cliche, I guess it's things like that do make it sort of more of a home, and it makes it sort of a more personal experience, and you enjoy the things that you use. And like you said, rather than sort of having 3 or 4 different pans that each have sort of this niche thing, you buy sort of one really good solid cast iron skillet that can sort of do everything and will sort of last for such a long time. And it's the same with there's so many other things in a kitchen. I mean, there's tools and sort of gimmicks and stuff that people are buying or that people are selling, and sort of one tool just for an avocado, and when in the grand scheme of things you can do that with a good chef's knife, and with a good chef knife you can do everything that you can do with, I'd say, sort of 80% of the gadgets and gimmicks. You can achieve the same thing with just a sort of plain, simple but good and long lasting chef's knife.
Yeah, absolutely. And in doing that, you're also gaining a skill that now you can use that knife for other things. and you're decluttering, and it's just the benefits just are exponential. Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah, no, they definitely are. And in terms of, you just mentioned decluttering, when you had the sort of the transition into the tiny house with sort of narrowing down possessions and things, was that something that you sort of found an easy process? Did you struggle? Have you got any sort of tips and tricks for the sort of the downsizing and the sort of the process of moving tiny?
Absolutely. It definitely was a process. I guess one advantage for me, unlike some people who maybe have to get into a tiny house a little more quickly, I had no rush. And so over that 4-year build, I had time to kind of go through things and to downsize a little more progressively. In 2016, when I decided I wanted to build the house, I did a big purge. I probably got rid of like 70 articles of clothing. I had 4 bicycles. I got rid of 2 of those. Again, kitchen stuff. Oh, so much kitchen stuff. So doing a big purge really helped actually in starting the process and getting excited, because I find even now just getting rid of things is so freeing and so liberating, and getting rid of, a whole bunch of stuff if you can at once, if you're able to do that, feels really good. And I think also because I had that goal in mind of, okay, I know I'm going to be living in this tiny house at one point. In the back of my mind, I was already kind of living that tiny mindset, in that I wasn't buying more things if I didn't need to. But in the downsizing, it became kind of what, like we talked about, what is multi-purpose? What is going to serve multiple functions? Or are there duplicates of things, of course? So if I've got 10 different pots, like, do I really need 10 pots, or can I get away with a couple, right? Being realistic, you don't want to just have that one cast iron frying pan for everything you're doing. But so that was a bit of that transition as well. And things, I'm not a very sentimental person. I think that might be a hang up for some people if they have lots of knickknacks that mean something to them. Possibly like that thing is just a thing, even though it was your parents or your grandparents or your cousins or your sisters, it's still a thing. It's not them. And I know it might remind you of them, but if it's adding more stress to your life, and as far as moving and taking care of something or cleaning something, it's probably, maybe just don't need it, possibly, right? Maybe you can take a photo of it. Some people do that where they just make everything digital. I didn't do as much of that, but a good example is actually, as we talk about a chef's knife, is my grandma and I would cook in the kitchen. I was very young, but she would make things in the kitchen. That was a very nice memory for me. And when she passed away, I inherited her chef knife, and that's something that I use every day, and often think of her and those good memories I had in the kitchen with her. And so in doing that, I have something to remind me of her, but it's also very functional. So again, talking about multi-purpose, if something you have is also functional, then, but it's also sentimental, then definitely keep
ticks all the boxes. Right?
Yeah. And I'm very much of the mindset of like, better to wear out than rust out. If it's something just sitting on a shelf, doesn't do any good, use it, whatever it is. Like if it's an old car, drive it around or do something with it. Don't just let it sit there. So if people can think about that, and that, okay, this thing has a use and I should be using it. But if you haven't used something in years, and maybe just in case I might, yes, like you could, but if that's again holding you back from downsizing and moving into a tiny house, or when you think about we have to move to a different city, that this just becomes overwhelming because you've now accumulated so many things. Maybe you should try getting rid of that thing. Maybe again, from that environmental perspective, it's using, it took resources to make this thing, and for it just to sit there is a waste of those resources. So if you're not using it, someone else will, and they can get a use out of it. And then most things, for the most part, are replaceable. Like there are a few things that I got rid of that I've replaced since, but I had to get rid of them to know that I didn't need them, or I did need them rather, because I hadn't been using it for quite a while. So most things you can replace if you really need to. And so I would encourage people to be thoughtful about that, but not to hold on to things for that necessarily, that just in case, because that's a slippery slope where you just suddenly, you could become a hoarder, where if you have enough room that you just in case, I'll put this away, and maybe it doesn't happen, and maybe it's holding you back. So if that's the case, maybe you get rid of it, maybe you downsize. And something I really enjoy is, even when we go traveling, we'll go in the car camping, or when actually I was, before the pandemic, we were in Spain, France, and Portugal, traveling around, visiting Sarah's friends and family. And traveling in the car, like that's like downsizing to the max, right? You got your little kitchen, you got your few clothes. And when you do something like that, you realize, hey, I don't necessarily always need as much things as I think I do. And if people are going to do that, then they can kind of feel what that feels like. I think that's part of it too, is that you might get overwhelmed with how much stuff you have to deal with. And if you can kind of get that feeling of freedom, get a taste of that, that's going to probably push you forward and say, hey, I can do this. So and also taking your time if you can, like tackling one area, maybe it's one room of the house, tackle that area, tackle one little thing, get rid of one box of things and go from there. Don't feel like you have to just empty out your entire house all at once, because that's not always realistic. And then you might throw something away that really, I really needed that. Oh no. And then there's that financial cost to replace it. And again, the environmental cost of using it and replacing it. And along those lines, another thing is the sharing economy is something I really enjoy, is that, what do you have that other people could use, or what do they have that you could use? And a great example is a power drill. So many people have one of those and they use it for a few minutes to do a little project, and then it just sits there. Different, like with me, I use it so much for the build, but do you know a friend who has a drill you could borrow? Or if you have neighbors, you maybe share a lawnmower or something like that, some sort of tools where you don't have to own one of everything if your neighbor does. So that, again, reduces how many things you need to have in your house. And so it helps you downsize. And you're also building community where you're talking to your neighbors, you're engaging with them. Let's build that community. And then again, of course, the environmental impact of you're now purchasing, instead of 12 lawnmowers for 12 houses, it's 1 or 2 for those 12 houses, and how much better that is for everyone.
Yeah. There's so many great points that you've just mentioned there that I'd like to sort of just go into. And there was just, like I said, just so many things that you brought up there that make so much sense and are great, really, really easy to action tips for people as well. So in terms of, like you said, the sort of sentimental, I'm similar to you in the respect that I sort of don't get really attached to things. And you mentioned as well, the photos of things is a great option as well for people. So say someone sort of left an item for you, left a piece of furniture, rather than it sort of being a burden on you to sort of have to take care of this, to sort of maintain it, to sort of move it around with you, to sort of fit it in. If it doesn't sort of fit with your lifestyle, then the chances are sort of a photo or sort of will serve that memory still, and it would sort of be I guess what would have been wanted for that is to not sort of have it weighing on your mind, and to have it as something that sort of causes more stress. So in terms of belongings, obviously it's nice to sort of have a couple of sentimental things. I've got sort of a small box of sort of special things from sort of the previous years of my life, but then everything else is sort of always obviously not replaceable in the sort of anti-environmental respect, but in terms of if there's something that you can sort of donate or sort of give to someone or share with someone, but in the grand scheme of things, you don't sort of need sort of so many new things, so many different things that you can sort of be able to share, to donate, to sell, and there's so many resources for that make it worthwhile. And I think, like you said, the lawnmowers and things like that is something I've not sort of thought of personally, but is a great way to sort of be able to save money and to build and maintain and reinforce relationships with neighbors, with sort of friends, and that is great. And that's something I definitely sort of suggest to everyone listening, that if you're moving and you're looking at investing in some of these things and power tools that, like you said, you'll use to sort of hang a picture to sort of fix something, and then it will be sat there for 6 months until it's used again for a couple of minutes. You can borrow it off a friend, and that's an interaction that you wouldn't have had if you'd have had your own. You've saved money. You've sort of been able to create so many sort of more connections. And I think that's just fantastic. A great idea.
Yeah, no, I really, really enjoy that aspect of tiny living in that community for sure. And going back to your point about even getting rid of things, like I've probably got rid of hundreds of things. I can think of 1 or 2 that I kind of miss, or I again replace because we needed it later on. Like out of hundreds of things, 1 or 2 that okay, we could replace that. And how many? And I probably thought going into, I need this. No, I need this. I really need this. And once it's gone, you kind of even forget about it. Like there's, again, 70 articles of clothing. I don't remember what clothes I was wearing. Yeah. I've got the clothes I have, and I don't really need a lot more. So so it's really amazing how quickly you forget about the things, because again, they are just stuff.
They are just things.
Yeah, you can't. People, experiences, those things matter and are meaningful, and things are a vehicle for that, right? If you, like building my house, I couldn't have done it without the tools, and I did end up buying tools because I just couldn't borrow a drill every day for 4 years, right? Eventually, you have to pay that back, but for certain things, you can definitely share and develop some community in that way.
Yeah, and like we said, they are just things. And I guess the chances are that the clothes that you have now are the clothes that you either sort of had before and you preferred and that you'd sort of be picking out anyway. So the other ones are just sort of sat there, and it sort of allows you to narrow your focus onto, again, less but better, the things that you actually really enjoy using and you get joy from, and you sort of get fulfillment from wearing, from using. So you're able to sort of spend more of your time sort of using the things that you enjoy more, rather than sort of just looking and being overwhelmed by a sort of huge wardrobe full of things that you think, oh, I don't really like that, I don't want to wear this. You can sort of focus in and narrow down on the things that you really like, the things that you really want, and it just sort of just makes everything else easier.
Yeah, much like our kitchen example, like you appreciate that sweater that you've been wearing for years and years, or whatever that article of clothing is. And again, the buy me once philosophy, if you're buying quality clothes, yes, it might be a little more expensive up front. Maybe they're more ethical. You appreciate them that much more. When you have a closet full of all sorts of different things you never wear, you forget about what was even in there, and the money you've spent and the time. And is it really worth it for you to be shopping all the time? And another part of that we could get into is like, what is the motivation behind that, right? When you're, again, shopping is that kind of a retail therapy thing where I'm not feeling great or I'm not fulfilled, I'm just gonna spend some money on some clothes and make myself look better. And that is a very short-term mindset where it's like, yeah, that might feel good in the moment to click that thing and order
gratification.
it. Yeah, like, oh yeah, that'll be good, and I need that to be happy. And that thing might give you an experience, perhaps, or those clothes might make you feel better in the moment. But deep down, like, that's not probably really the problem. No. It's definitely more, there's something going on that in your life that you maybe need to fix, or you need to focus more on being mindful and in the moment and what makes you happy. And so that really ties into that, right? Where if you have all these things that are probably distracting you, if it's, again, gadgets, if it's clothes, if it's just stuff, all that stuff is perhaps not necessary. And if you have it to be happy, then that's definitely the wrong motivation.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And like we said, you get the instant gratification from sort of doing all of these sort of retail therapy purchases, things like that. But in the grand scheme of things, you've got to think, why are you doing this? Are you doing this for yourself because it's something that you sort of will get fulfillment from? If so, then fair enough. But if you're sort of looking to buy these things to make you feel better about yourself, or to sort of impress people, or then you're doing it for the wrong reasons, and it will end up sort of being unfulfilling, and it won't sort of solve those problems. You need to sort of take a deeper look in terms of what may be sort of the root of this, and working on fixing that, rather than sort of trying to sort of cover it over, which is better mentally, physically, and financially in all aspects.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of work. It's not as easy as clicking those buttons and buying something, but the benefits you have are far, far greater, right? Even the tiny house as an example, right? Even that is like, what do I really need to be happy? Do I really need, as you know, you've talked about the American dream and everything, like, do I really need this big house and the 2 cars and the garage and all these other things? Even just questioning that, like, on a bigger scale, but again, you could go down to clothes and other purchases, is what makes me happy, or where am I getting my happiness from? And if it's things, and that's, definitely want to check your priorities on that one. And like we talked about the benefits as well of nothing else, just financial, right? Imagine having, like, right now I'm very frugal in my living, and it became a bit of a habit. But in doing that, I'm now able to pursue acting jobs and making films and making a podcast. And I couldn't do that if I was spending money like crazy, because spending money is easy. I could do that all day long. Super easy, right? Saving money, being frugal, being intentional with your purchases is work, and it's a habit you have to form like anything else. But once you do that, it just opens up so many more possibilities, and I have so much less stress in my life because I have so few expenses that if I have to I could have a year's worth of savings just quite easily if I, like, right now, because my costs are so low, because we don't pay rent or mortgage because the house is paid for, right? So it's really just like my car insurance, a bit of gas, food, which I've gotten very, very low. And we don't buy a lot of things, right? So I can live on $500 a month with everything, right? All my stuff, and I'm comfortable and I'm happy. And in doing that, someone might say that, well, you could be so much happier if you were traveling around the world and doing all these crazy things and getting all these experiences. Maybe, yes, but looking at the cost of those things, what am I giving up? So for me, it was a lot about my time, in that those experiences might be enjoyable, but if it's going to cost me 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, I've only got 2 weeks of holidays. Well, if the lifestyle is costing me so much of my life, really, then is that worth it? Where right now I'm doing the things I want to do. And even though I'm not prioritizing money, not spending as much, not buying things, keeping my cost of living low allows me to pursue the things I want to do and have a wide open schedule that if someone says, hey, you want to go do this project for 2 weeks? Yeah, let's do it. Let's go. I can put this on pause and I'm making my own schedule. And for me, that's so rewarding and so empowering that I think people really underestimate that they think that, all those comforts, all the things they buy and things they need are essential. And then you think, no, they're not really, they're not essential. And you could be doing so much more with your life and your time if you just let those things go.
Yeah, definitely. And that is just amazing and so inspiring for me to hear as well, just how empowering and how empowered you have been sort of through this lifestyle, and the fact you are able to set your own priorities and you are able to sort of set your schedule and to be able to sort of do the jobs that you'd like to do and sort of be able to sort of cut down those costs and live frugally so that you aren't sort of having to exchange your time for money in terms of sort of working until you're 65 and then retiring and enjoying life. You're able to enjoy life now, and you're able to do the things that you're wanting to do rather than sort of just continuing on the sort of the wheel of working. You're able to set your own priorities, and that is just hugely empowering and super inspirational, really.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah. And it was definitely a journey, right? It wasn't again that I just decided that.
It just happened. Yeah.
I definitely had to go through that process. One of my favorite examples is when I was working at the post-secondary institution, our administrative assistant, she was probably in her late 50s, had been working at that institution for 20, 30 years and was retiring. And we were working a lot with students, and she was kind of bitter by the end and she wasn't enjoying her job, and it was time to move on. And so she retired. She never married. She took care of her mom, who was aging, traveled a little bit. And within a year of her retiring, she was diagnosed with an advanced form of cancer and she passed away. She died. Right. And how sad is that? And if she had known maybe 10, 20 years before that,
things would have changed. Yeah.
You're going to die at 66 and you're going to, just work at this job that you kind of hated. Would she have changed her life path in that moment, saying, oh my God, I need to prioritize what I actually want to do and what's important to me. So that was part of my journey too. It's like seeing people like that who are like, you're not happy in what you're doing. You're just doing this to pay bills. And to be fair, like my partner and I, we don't have any children, so we don't have any dependents. That definitely changes your priorities. We don't have, like, our parents are quite healthy. We don't have any dependents that way. So every situation is different. But I think a lot of people, the majority of people, are spending more than they need to, or in a job that is okay, but they don't love it and they're complacent, and they could change their situation, but they just choose not to. Like we've talked about the mindset. So much of that is just deciding, right? Like with the tiny house, there are people who go on the YouTube channels, they read all the blogs, they follow the podcasts, they know the information, and maybe they want to do it. Maybe they have the financial resources to do it, but they, for some reason, don't. And probably a lot of that is that just that mindset shift of they decide at one point, I'm going to do this or I'm not. And you make that decision every day with everything you do, is that I'm going to do this or I'm not. And if you're constantly prioritizing just doing the job to make money, to pay for the stuff, you should probably question that, especially if you're not happy, right? As opposed to, yes, like obviously there are things like education and pursuing projects and worthwhile things that take your time, but they aren't necessarily just chasing fame or fortune or status or money. If those are the things that you're chasing, then there is an alternative. There is another way that you could live in. And I would say you're probably going to be happier. And again, for me, I find a lot less stress as well, like especially keeping my costs so low. That really frees up the financial stress, which I think is a big factor for a lot of people. Is money's tight. They're not making enough money. In some ways, depending on where you live and your situation, a lot of that is choice. And what can you do to bring your costs down where you can pursue those things you want to do, or you can leave that full 9-to-5 job. That's really a process and something worth considering.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like you mentioned, that sort of bleak reminder of how short life is and how you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, and you never know sort of what's coming, why it's so important. And I think that's should be a sort of a good motivation in terms of being able to sort of focus your priorities and making sure that you're able to sort of start taking those steps to sort of living a more fulfilling life, I guess. And that's obviously one of the things that you've been able to do since moving tiny. And it's been sort of 7 or 8 months now you've been living in the tiny house.
Yeah. We moved in the spring, and it's now the new year. So it's coming on, 8 months or so living in the
8
tiny
months.
house. Yeah.
Perfect. Is there any other sort of lessons or things that you've sort of noticed change? Because obviously you mentioned keeping your costs low has allowed you to sort of spend more time doing the things you enjoy. And you mentioned obviously you've got some bikes as well. So have you found sort of tiny living has enabled you to sort of focus more on the things you sort of would like to do rather than you have to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Living tiny, like just functionally, it's a smaller space, even just to clean. And so that just takes less time as well. I mean, living off grid is a little bit more work because now we have solar panels and I have to be checking those. Like it snowed today, so I had to clear those off. Actually, something I did with that is I put it on a hinging system so it tracks the sun. So I have it in an upright position for winter mode. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a bit like I have to adjust that. We have to check out where the propane levels are, just making sure that everything's working well. Hauling the water is another thing. So I'm spending a little more time on some of that house stuff. Yeah. But overall, I would say that living this way absolutely frees up more of my time to do the things I want to do, for sure.
Brilliant. And it would be great as well to obviously, I've sort of had a look at the pictures of your tiny house, and there's obviously the fantastic, the reclaimed oak countertops and things like that as well. So it'd be great to sort of get a feature of that up on Tiny House Ideas as well, so that listeners can sort of put the podcast and your tiny house sort of together and sort of see your space for inspiration, or to see how you're doing things potentially, and sort of have a look at those great features. Obviously, you have got those oak countertops. So is there sort of any other features of the tiny house that you'd like to sort of touch on, or?
Yeah, for sure. I think it'd be great if people could see it, because I definitely tried to prioritize aesthetics. I tried to make it as beautiful as possible. Yeah, a couple of things
that's come through. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad. A couple of things that I are unique about the house, and I mentioned that I'm a welder, and so there's actually a lot of metal work within the house, and that's something I really enjoy about tiny houses. That if you're building your own, a lot of people almost take that on as like an artistic project where they do all sorts of like crazy, interesting things that you probably wouldn't have done in a conventional house. And so I included a lot of metal in my design, partly because, again, learning to weld, that was a skill I had, and that served well in certain areas. Like, for example, my bedroom loft, it's above the living room, and most are made of 2x4s, 2x6s. You build an extra, floor in for the loft. Whereas mine is made of 1-inch square tubing, so it's 1 inch thick. My bedroom loft is 1 inch thick, so it's just the bed frame, right? So yeah, and because it's metal, it's tubing. It's potentially lighter than if you made it out of wood. Yeah, and I'm saving a lot of space. So now I've got more headroom in the living room and more headroom in the loft, because I've used the metal to make a very compact. It's kind of like a bunk bed actually, but compact loft. Same with the stairs. All of those things that are made of metal. It's freeing up more space because I'm using that structural strength of the metal, and allows for different designs and in that way as well, that I can do things I probably couldn't do with wood. So I'm really, really proud of a lot of the metal work I did. I covered the inside with 15 gauge painted aluminum. Part of that was to keep it light because it is on wheels. And originally I thought I may want to do like a documentary project where I travel around with the house.
Amazing.
Since moving to the farm, like even then I was on pins and needles. I'm like, this is a lot. I spent 4 years in this thing. I don't want anything to happen to it. So I've since probably abandoned that idea, that conventional idea of I'm going to take it around the country. But I built it as light as possible. So I did aluminum on the interior, and it's painted white. So that also allows a lot of reflection. And so it makes makes it
feel bigger.
Yeah, very bright and very open. Another thing I love is I think it's really tempting in a tiny house to prioritize storage space. Like, again, you have to store everything in your house. And I that's something we've done. It's very functional, has lots of storage space, but I've also prioritized how you move in the house. So an example of that would be, we've got a galley style kitchen. So you come into the main entrance and then you start with the kitchen. Across from the kitchen is a closet, and we store our coats and our boots and things like that in there. And it would be tempting to make that closet 2 feet deep to maximize the storage. But I intentionally made it, I think it's about 10 inches deep. It's quite shallow. And in that way, it allows a lot more movement in the kitchen. So I can be cooking and then Sarah can go around me, or vice versa. And that functionality in how you move really makes the space feel a lot bigger and a lot easier to get around. So I would definitely prioritize that. in my design. I've already talked about the bathroom being 2 feet up, and I put the maintenance room under there. So we ended up putting the fresh and gray water tanks, the batteries, the furnace, the water heater. It's all underneath there. It's out of the way. That works really well, and it's all insulated as well. And then I also built access doors on the either side on the outside of the house so that I could open that and I could drain the water. I could get at the batteries. It made it much more functional. And yeah. And then overall, just it's a beautiful, lovely space. We've got 2 skylights, one in the kitchen area. That's lots of light in. We've got one in the bathroom. Oh, one thing with the water I could mention.
Yeah, for sure.
You can't see it in the photos, but as far as water saving, I've got an on-demand water heater. And when I first hooked it up, I turned it on and I tested it out. And it took a little while for the water to heat up. It was fast, but it was probably like 15 seconds. I was watching this water go down the drain. And so I did a little bit of research and I got it's just called a diverter. And I did PEX plumbing, and it just diverts the water in a different direction, just a ball valve. So instead of going on and off, it goes right or left. And so I plumbed all of my faucets where when I turn that diverter switch, it actually goes back into the freshwater tank. And it's this closed loop system where now it's heating up the water, but it's not actually draining. It's not going to my gray water tank. So I wait that 15 seconds, I switch it over, then I've got like on-demand hot water, and I haven't wasted any water. So a few of those little designs that I think really worked out well especially when you're building it yourself and you're looking to live in it full time. And here in Canada, in the winter as well, you really consider what goes into the house and how you use your water and how you use your electricity. And I think I did a pretty good job of that. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it.
Brilliant. And I guess, are there any sort of final tips or any advice, anything else you'd like to go into as well, or sort of just some advice, I guess, to round off in terms of for people that are looking to sort of follow in the similar path?
Yeah, I think in some of the vein we've talked about is looking at your mindset and where you are and your support systems that you have in place. And part of it is just eventually taking that leap and doing it. And you will figure it out. Even now, I've noticed like how easily we've adapted to the smaller space. So a good example of that is when I first started the build, Sarah and I were both working in offices, right? And then that changed, and I didn't really plan for that. I didn't like have a separate space where we could have an office. So in our living room area is now kind of doubles as an office space, and you would think that that's not optimal. But in a tiny house, you have to make use of the space. And so we have our office. This is where I'm recording the episode with you. And we just switch it over and it becomes the office. And when we're done, we put it away and it becomes our eating area. And I was actually surprised at how easy that was. Yeah. And there's 2 of us. We both have computers and we're both here in a very small space. And it just works. You just it's like a goldfish. You just adapt to the space. So if for advice, I would say, don't think that you have to cram everything into the house or even get rid of everything all at once. We had a bit of a downsizing even once we moved to the farm because we had a few extra things. We just put away in some Rubbermaids in a garage. And so we didn't have to get rid of everything. So don't think you have to do it all at once. You have to go in off the deep end. You could even get a tiny house, downsize, and then keep figuring out as you go and kind of evolve the space. We've changed the space even a little bit, nothing major, but those, like the office example, how can you even make the space even that much more functional, even though it wasn't part of the design? So again, it comes to that mindset of thinking about the space in more of functionality. So know that you don't have to have everything in place, and there's going to be thousands of decisions you have to make. If you're going to build your own, you're not going to make every perfect decision. That's okay. Just keep going, put the time and put the effort in, and you'll get there eventually.
Well, amazing. And I think that all sounds fantastic. And there's some really, really good tips there for people that are listening who are sort of looking to like we said, sort of follow in the footsteps or look to sort of start taking that first step on the journey in terms of mindset and in terms of sort of narrowing down physical possessions and looking at sort of ways they can end up living life on their own terms. So it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast and to hear your insight and to hear your experiences. And it's been really interesting to discuss the mindset things that we have as well. And hopefully that'll be some useful, actionable tips for the people that are listening. So yeah, thanks again. It's been brilliant.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Harry.
No problem at all. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Tiny House Ideas podcast. If you've got any questions, any suggestions, any questions for future episodes, any ideas, then please do get in touch. Instagram's the easiest way to reach me at Tiny House Ideas. If you'd like to support the podcast, as I've mentioned, it's available on Patreon to support, and we've got a private Discord group there where we can have the discussion. We can really break down the podcast, talk about each episode, talk about upcoming episodes, and also watch all of the new releases early.